The White Silence of Dead Mountain. The Dyatlov Mystery. The wind on Holatsiakl doesn't just blow, it screams. To the Mansi natives, the name translates to Dead Mountain, a grim prophecy that 9 elite Soviet hikers should have heeded in the winter of 1959. What started as a high-altitude expedition ended in a scene so grisly and illogical that it defied the laws of physics and human psychology. Why would experienced trekkers rip open their own tent from the inside and flee into a minus 30 degrees Celsius blizzard without boots? Why were some bodies found with crushed ribs but no external bruises, while another was missing her tongue? This is not just a ghost story. It is the documented, classified, and terrifying reality of the Dyatlov Pass incident. The iron will of the Ural 9. In late January 1959, a group of 10 students and graduates from the Ural Polytechnic Institute set out for the northern Urals. Led by the charismatic Igor Dyatlov, they were seasoned Grade 2 hikers, aiming for Grade 3 certification, the highest available in the USSR. They were young, vibrant, and fiercely intelligent. Among them was Yuri Yudin, who would become the luckiest man in Russia when a flare-up of chronic sciatica forced him to turn back at the last settlement, Vizhai. As he hugged his friends goodbye, he had no idea he was embracing ghosts. The group pushed forward into the wilderness. Their diaries, later recovered, showed a group in high spirits, documenting the grueling beauty of the Siberian taiga. But as they approached the slopes of Kholat Sayak, the weather turned. On February 1st, blinded by a snowstorm, they drifted off course. Instead of finding the shelter of the tree line, they pitched their tent on the exposed, barren slope of the mountain. It was their final night on Earth. The night of the impossible. When the group failed to send a telegram by February 12th, search parties were dispatched. What they found on February 26th haunted the investigators for decades. The tent was buried in snow, abandoned. Crucially, it had been sliced open from the inside. It appeared the hikers had been so desperate to escape that they didn't use the zipper. They used knives to claw their way out into the dark. Footprints led away from the tent, some in socks, one in a single boot, others barefoot. In the bone-chilling Russian winter, this was a death sentence. The trail led 1.5 kilometers down the slope toward a large cedar tree. The first discoveries. Under the cedar, the bodies of Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonishenko were found, dressed only in underwear, their hands burned from trying to climb the tree. The return path. Between the tree and the tent lay 3 more bodies, including Igor Dyatlov. Their positions suggested they were crawling back toward the tent, dying of hypothermia one by one in the slope. The trauma of the ravine. It wasn't until the spring thaw in May that the remaining 4 hikers were found in a ravine, buried under 4 meters of snow. This is where the story shifts from a tragic accident to a horrific mystery. Unlike the first 5, these hikers had suffered massive internal trauma. Nikolai Thibault Brignol had a fractured skull so severe it was likened to a high-speed car crash. Semyon Zolotaryov and Ludmila Dubinina had their chests crushed with such force that their ribs were shattered. The missing pieces. Dubinina was missing her tongue, eyes, and part of her facial tissue. The invisible force. Most bafflingly, there were no external soft tissue injuries corresponding to the bone fractures. It was as if they had been crushed by a massive wave of pressure that left the skin intact.
The evidence that shouldn't exist. As the Soviet authorities investigated, the details became increasingly bizarre. Radiation. Analysis of the hikers' clothing revealed significant levels of radioactive contamination. In the middle of the Siberian wilderness in 1959, this was inexplicable. The orange orbs. Another group of hikers nearby, as well as local Mansi tribesmen and even Soviet meteorological staff, reported seeing strange glowing orange spheres in the sky on the night the group died. The unknown compelling force. The official Soviet investigation was closed abruptly in May 1959. The lead investigator, Lev Ivanov, famously concluded the group died due to an unknown compelling force. The files were sent to a secret archive. The ghost of Semyon Zolotaryov. Among the group, Semyon Zolotaryov was the outlier. At 37, he was much older than the students, a great patriotic war veteran with mysterious tattoos that no one quite understood. One tattoo simply read Gina, while another depicted a star and the year 1921. On the night of the disaster, Semyon was found better dressed than the others, and curiously, he was the only one carrying a camera around his neck, a camera that disappeared, only for its film to be discovered later, ruined by water and light. Some believe Zolotaryov was an undercover KGB agent tasked with a controlled delivery of radioactive materials to foreign spies in the wilderness. This would explain the radiation on the clothes. But if the meeting went south, why would the spies leave the bodies behind instead of disposing of them? The veteran's presence adds a layer of Cold War espionage to an already crowded mystery.
The paradox of paradoxical undressing. To understand why the hikers left their tent without boots in minus 30 degrees Celsius weather, forensic experts point to a phenomenon called paradoxical undressing. In the final stages of hypothermia, the body's capillaries suddenly dilate, creating a false sensation of burning heat. The victim, though freezing to death, feels as if they are on fire and strips off their clothes. However, this doesn't explain the cut tent. Paradoxical undressing happens at the end of the freezing process. The Dyatlov hikers fled the tent first. Something, a sound, a light, or a vibration, convinced them that staying inside the tent was more dangerous than facing a Siberian blizzard naked.
The infrasound, the voice of the wind. A compelling modern theory involves Kármán vortex streets. When the wind hits the specific dome shape of Kholat-Syakhl, it can create a physical phenomenon known as infrasound, sound waves below the frequency of human hearing. While you can't hear infrasound, your body feels it. Research shows it causes extreme physiological terror, pounding in the chest and difficulty breathing, visual hallucinations, uncontrollable panic. If the mountain itself began to hum with a frequency that induced madness, the hikers might have slashed their way out to escape a presence that wasn't actually there, only to realize too late that the real enemy was the cold. The final photos and the unknown. The last frame of the film recovered from the hikers' cameras is one of the most debated pieces of evidence in history. It isn't a picture of a person or a landscape. It is a blurry, glowing shape against a pitch-black background, the 33rd frame. Skeptics say it's just a light leak or a shaky hand. Conspiracy theorists say it's the last thing the hikers saw, a Soviet R-7 missile,
a glowing orb, or something not of this world. The silence of the Urals. In the decades since, adventurers have returned to the pass. Some have reported strange equipment failures. Others feel an overwhelming sense of dread. The Russian government officially reclosed the case in 2020, blaming a combination of a weather-triggered avalanche and poor visibility. But for the families of the victims and the millions of people fascinated by the case, that answer is too simple. It doesn't explain why the Soviet military arrived at the site before the official search party. It doesn't explain the sun-tanned look of the skin on the corpses, reported by relatives at the funerals.
The Dyatlov Pass remains a scar on the map of the Ural Mountains. It is a story of human endurance met by an inhuman end. As the wind whistles through the pass today, it carries the same chilling message it did in 1959. Some mysteries are not meant to be solved. They are meant to be feared.